Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drum McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at thechangeleader.com. Changing Higher Ed is sponsored by Blackbaud, the world's leading cloud software company powering social good. With their cloud solution for higher education, Blackbaud connects thousands of campuses worldwide. Visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn how they can help your institution deliver a better experience. And now, here's your host, Drum McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our special guest today is Dr. Eric Boynton, provost at Beloit College. Eric is relatively new to Beloit, having become its provost in June 2019, just in time to deal with COVID. He joined us today from his home office to talk with us about how Beloit has navigated the crisis, and especially how they've settled on a delivery mode for the college that is flexible and will work whether they have a fall term on campus, whether it's blended or fully online. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John, for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Been looking forward to this. You're at Beloit College, and like most, if not all, colleges and universities across America and the world, we've all been affected by COVID crisis. And so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about what you've done at Beloit for spring term, but then talk through your decision processes on how you came up with what you're going to do for fall term, which is unique, and there aren't a whole lot of colleges doing what you're doing. So at this point, it's March 1st. We're starting to hear more about COVID and what's going on with that. What were you all doing at Beloit?
Right. So I imagine we were doing what was happening across the nation, and the first thing we did in senior staff was to form a COVID-19 task force with all of the right people on that task force in order to address the ways in which COVID was going to burn over the institution. And so like all those task forces, we started to huddle up, and we probably met every day for a number of weeks. Some of those days were long days. And, probably in the middle of March, you would start at 8 a.m. in the morning and develop a plan, a messaging plan for that afternoon. And by 10, of course, the plan you had established was needed to be scrapped because things were moving so quickly. And so at 4, you had a new plan, but you realized you had to order in dinner because 8 p.m. that night was actually the time in which you were able to get a message out. And so it was this defensive posture that everybody was positioned in. And at Beloit, we decided to move towards an online delivery of the curriculum during spring break. And so we extended our spring break by a second week, fitting that within DOE regulations. And then we tried to buy ourselves some time to see if there was a way to bring students back to campus after 2 weeks, and being quickly clear that we couldn't do that. And so, like most institutions, we pivoted to a fully online delivery of the curriculum after that 2-week spring break until the end of the term.
Mm-hmm. Did you have online before?
So no, not very little. In fact, like most small liberal arts institutions, we had not built out that capacity. There was, of course, blended courses on campus, and it really depended upon the professor and the aptitude of that professor to engage in technology. There were a couple people who offered online summer courses, but it was very few. And so in that regard, the spring, I think, it really is a glorious experiment of getting those faculty who never thought about teaching in this way to teach in this way. And maybe we can come back to this later in the conversation, but it's a way in which small liberal arts and places like Beloit can shine, because we'll be able to teach other institutions for whom their business model is built around online education, other ways of going about educating our students in remote or online environments that no one ever thought of until you get a liberal arts professor having to engage in that kind of technology, right? And not to say it wasn't easy. There's really some potential, I think, going forward. And in that regard, the spring was a fantastic device to get people to turn the soil on their courses. You know, I live in Wisconsin and it's farms all around me. And so you turn the soil and you break up those clogs and the nutrients come out, and you start thinking differently about how you can get your goals done pedagogically. And one way to do that, of course, is through technology. So I imagine at Beloit and other places, these kinds of really interesting technological supplements to face-to-face learning will persist in the coming years, and it will make education better.
Well, as the saying goes, don't waste a good crisis.
Right.
And so you had your task force. Things were changing so quickly that you'd get together at 8 o'clock, and by 10 o'clock, the plan that you'd come up with was already obsolete.
Yep.
As a group, how do you deal with that kind of thing?
Let me come back. The question, as an individual, how did I deal with that? And then I'll talk about how the group dealt with it. Because I didn't deal with that very well. I took the job June 10th. And so this is the first year of my provosting at Beloit. And from the summer until then, we were working hard to develop some really interesting pedagogical innovations at Beloit that were trying to demonstrate the distinctiveness of the education. And so I was in a completely offensive posture until COVID hit. And then I was in a completely defensive posture. And I was totally thrown off. And I can remember this conversation, Drum. It was March 20th. And I had my hour-and-a-half meeting with Scott Bierman, the president of Beloit. My hour-and-a-half meeting traditionally goes about 2.5, 3 hours. Yeah, but it was 5 minutes in. And I said, Scott, I feel like I'm in the fog of war. I cannot see what's on the horizon. We're making all these plans and these decisions for the next day, for the next week, to make sure we don't, drop the ball in 3 months or 2 weeks from now. None of it was planned out. There was no strategy able to, to view into the future. I told him I just despised this defensive crouch that we were in. And he said, well, let's talk about that. And that's where we forced ourselves to think about the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized what was happening to us now. And so we started thinking about what would maximize flexibility and minimize disruption. And one of the things we're experiencing, this is both, I think, nationwide, it's students and faculty, juggling 4 online courses simultaneously was really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of weight that just set on both students and professors in different ways, but it was really difficult. And, I know that some of the colleges that work in online environments, they don't do that. They have these series of kind of 8-week sessions over the whole year. And you may take 1 or 2 courses in those sessions, but over the space of 4 years or 5 years, you start gathering enough credits to work towards graduation. But very few of those places actually, students don't take 4 classes in an 8-week session. And it's interesting, they broke them up into 8 weeks. You kind of come in, you get out. And so our initial discussion of that was, what if we moved to a block plan in the fall? So 3.5 weeks. So let's carve up the semester into 4s in the quarters. One way to think about that is maximizing, what's in our hands, what are we capable of controlling? Because at that time, Drum, with the COVID, it felt like nothing was in our control. Everything was triage. Everything was reactive, right? So the only 2 things were the delivery of the curriculum and the calendar. That's it. Mm-hmm. So we started thinking about the delivery of the curriculum in terms of block 3.5-week courses. And then that leads to the discussion of my personal inability to deal with COVID, right? And then I took that to the group. And it was a series. Then that was the 20th, I think it was a Thursday. On that Saturday, I had a meeting with the VP of enrollment. On Sunday, I had a meeting with the VP of development, and then with the faculty leader of ASP, Academic Strategic Planning, which is the key faculty committee on campus. Mm-hmm. And on Sunday, I described the block idea to them. And some people, I would describe it to them very quickly. There would be like a pause of maybe 10 to 15 seconds. And then the person would say, oh, right. So there were those people. who you didn't really have to place an argument. They could just see, that's the maximal flexibility, because only one course at a time is affected, right? And I can space these things out through the semester. I can pivot in and out of residential living, right? One nice way to think about it is, instead of 1/8 of your, or 1/16 of your career being affected, it goes down to possibly, 1/64th or 1/32nd of your educational career being affected by online delivery if COVID rages. And then there were other faculty and staff that it would take 2-3 hours to fully flesh out the argument. Mm-hmm. And so what happened on Monday, I went to ASP, Academic Strategic Planning Committee, and we had a 2.5-hour meeting. And by the end of that meeting, we had abandoned the block plan and landed on the mods plan, which is 2 full unit courses, right? So the semester is split into 2, not 4. So we have 7.5-week modules. And here's the serendipity. It's both serendipity, but there's an odd sense of planning, is that the mod plan was developed at Beloit 5 years prior, long before I arrived. Mm-hmm. And there was this moment, and this comes from my teaching, is that, when you're teaching and you're getting out difficult arguments, sometimes in the audience you see a student who all of a sudden their eyes go to the corner of the room and you can see the wheels turning, and
sure,
they're thinking something, right? And at that point, a good professor says, Suzanne, what is it that you're thinking right now, right? And then they come out with this really interesting thought that then you can pivot the whole class around. So that actually happened in my ASP meeting. I saw someone whose wheels were turning. And so I called on that person specifically, and I said, you know what? I think I just found a document in which Beloit invented the mod plan 5 years prior. Of course, it was a different time for Beloit. They didn't enact it. They didn't institute it because it was too radical at the time. So here's a situation in which it was already built into the DNA of the place. Mm-hmm. And so it was a really interesting meeting.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a colleague of mine back when this thing first hit. She's the interim provost at Palo Alto University. And they had something similar to that as well, that they had done planning in the past that they were able to pull in leverage. And so it made the planning easier. And also from the selling perspective to faculty, because when a faculty leader comes up with the idea, of course, we all know that faculty believe that when someone moves up into administration, they automatically lose 20 points of IQ.
Right.
But when they say, oh yeah, we've done this before, we've thought about this, it helps to get that direction the way it needs to be. So let's go back a little bit to your COVID task force. Mm-hmm. Who was involved in that?
Okay, so it's me as provost. It's the chief technology officer. It's the chief operations officer, our chief health and wellness person. It is the dean of students. It is the assistant to the president. And the VP of enrollment. That's the COVID task force.
Okay. That's good. Do you have athletics on the campus as well?
Right. And the AD now reports directly to me. But the AD was not on the task force.
Was the president on the task force?
No, purposely the president was not on the task force. So the president's assistant was on the task force, so there would be a red line, and the president would meet with this person, multiple times in a week. And of course, I would be meeting with Scott. But it was decided that I should run point on those efforts because it was going to be so curricularly focused that it gave him the time to give the broad picture.
So, and that makes sense in a lot of ways. So you made the decision, everything went online for spring. You started doing the planning. You came up with the plan for 2 courses every 7.5 weeks, which right. is not unusual in a normal time. In fact, a good friend of mine is the board chair for National University, and they do 1 online course per month, and it's very intense. But they move on with that. So what you're doing is a bit of a modification of that. I like what you're doing. What about summer? You've got the fall term pretty much set, And I think in a previous conversation, you said that because of the way you did it, you made the decision early on, you didn't have to go back and redo fall registration. So that was
Right.
a smart way to go as well.
So that was one of let me just address that speed. So we had this idea. We had to implement it within 10 days in order to catch registration. And we felt like if we didn't catch registration, we shouldn't proceed with the plan, because that would be too disruptive to register students for a full 15-week semester and then come back and pull the plug on them and redo it. So we felt as if we were really going to do this, we had to proceed very quickly. So to run that story out, after ASP, it was a day and a half later, we had a full faculty meeting in which we discussed it. And by the end of that week, so I had a discussion with Scott on Thursday, by the end of the next week, we had begun the process of implementing. Because then the next week, we had to break up the fall schedule that had already been set and then re-deliver it in courses and mods versus the whole semester. And Jeremy, here's one of the things that my chest bursts with pride. We used that opportunity strategically. What we didn't do, and the faculty were completely in on this, we didn't turn over the schedule back over to department chairs and individual faculty. The individual faculty trusted two well-respected faculty members, minds for this kind of thing, to massage the current schedule and re-deliver it in mods. And then, so strategically, we put certain lab courses maybe in the first mod, because we had the feeling like the first mod might be a better chance of being in person. And we also front-loaded certain first mod courses that would be appealing to first-year students to make that entryway all the more appealing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we pushed that back out to department chairs and faculty and asked them to tweak or change or, how it didn't fit for them. But by and large, 99% of what was scheduled, the faculty and department chairs agreed with. And that was crucial. So there was some strategic implementation of the plan itself. And so then we were able to change it before students even looked at the courses offered in the fall. They looked at the mods delivery. And I think that was crucial. So I can tell you that there's a list. I have a list now. There's about, that I know of, there's about 12 small liberal arts colleges that have adopted the Beloit mods plan. Every one of those this summer has had to blow up the fall schedule and re-register students. And I do not envy those campuses and those provosts. But some of those provosts, after this drum, it was within a week or so of people catching wind. I was interviewed by the campus paper, and the campus paper interview, this small little, campus paper at Beloit, it just caught fire, right? Drum, you're my 40th, I've had interviews, but you're my 40th kind of occasion where I've been able to share mod plans. And then there was a moment there of about 2 months where I would get calls 3 a day from provosts asking me how to do it. How do we do it? What about this problem? What about DOE? What about accreditation? Right? What about financial aid? But it's kind of fun to think about the ways in which we are setting, I think, an agenda in higher ed presently through the mod structure. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out post-COVID as well.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something that could work post-COVID. And now you've got the flexibility based on what you had to do for spring term. You've got the flexibility to teach these classes in a social distancing manner.
Yep.
Or completely online, or if the university has to shut down the face-to-face, everything can go directly online. And so you've built that flexibility in, which is so critical at this juncture.
Yes. So I agree, Drum. I don't think it's a choice between fully online and fully face-to-face. Like the fall or the next year is not going to look anything like the fall of 19, right? We just know that. But it's probably going to have this hybrid character. There's going to be some students, a large majority of students on campus. There's going to be some that can't be on campus for a variety of reasons. And there'll be some professors who ought not teach in person. And we're also allowing that. So it's going to be this hybrid situation in the fall and probably into the future, frankly. And we need to be able to adjust to those realities. One of the unintended possibilities of the mod structure. We did not think this through when we implemented it, but for the fall, you essentially have courses in the morning and courses in the afternoon. It's this beautiful way of dealing with density because your students are only passing one another there twice a day in the classes. So it's not just this absolute chaotic array of different class times. It's essentially 2 blocks. And it simplifies and clarifies the ways in which we'll move in and out of classroom spaces. And that one, I think, is a pretty potent opportunity that we didn't see, but now we are beginning to capitalize on.
Well, you go into, and we live out here in New Mexico, and we're mandatory face coverings, masks, whatever, whenever we go out in public. And pretty much every store that I've been in, grocery stores, et cetera, there's one door in, one door out. And if you've got that setup that you can do for your classrooms, obviously they've got to go in and out the same door, but if they're all coming in at the same time versus going out, but then into the buildings, one door in, one door out, it's an easier way to monitor traffic flow and make sure that social distancing takes place.
That's right. And I can tell you in my conversations with McAllister has adopted this plan. Those were some of the ideas that we talked about later on. And also with Bates is also adopting this plan as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's very smart now. Post-COVID, do you see yourself continuing with something like this or going back to what you did before, or kind of a combination?
This is a faculty decision, Drum. We will assess the heck out of this thing. We'll pay attention to how students experience it. We'll pay attention to the way faculty teach in it. It is an experiment for next year, and we will look very carefully at it, and we will bring this back for faculty approval if we think this is an interesting way to conduct ourselves. And as I said, there were a subset of faculty 5 years ago who thought it might be a really interesting way to conduct ourselves at Beloit. It really does open up the possibility for outside of classroom participation during the semester because it simplifies the schedule. And so that was one of the things. And that's one of the ways in which Beloit is leaning into this kind of holistic idea of an education and you learn in every nook and cranny of the place. And how do I capitalize the connections in and outside the classroom? And the MODS plan might provide the conditions to better do that. But it will be a faculty decision. I imagine that if it's not full-blown MODS in the future, there'll be more MODS offered because it was already on the books. So we didn't actually have to vote anything in these structures in. The MODS were already established in the registrar's office. So they're already sitting there. And so I just imagine now that even if it doesn't become the way in which Beloit conducts itself, it will be utilized more and more by more faculty. But I'm looking forward to those discussions down the line. And one of the ideas I've had recently is learning about different schools, in fact, sister schools, small liberal arts adopting the MODS plan. I think that Beloit will host maybe in November some kind of online conference in which all those sister schools come together and talk about how they're experiencing this, what seems to be working, what seems to be needing to be changed. And so I think we can also lean on our peers for insights there.
That sounds like a great idea. If you need any help facilitating that, I'd be happy to help you guys.
Oh, I love that, Drum. I love that. That would be a fantastic idea. I just wrote that down.
Thank you. Well, whatever I can do to help. So we're coming up to the end of the time, Eric. And what if you've got 3 takeaways for university presidents and provosts about this whole thing, what would they be?
So I noticed that, I think it was this morning, maybe, there was a Chronicle article written about how everybody's using the word agility. It was not a positive take on the notion of agility, right? I didn't read it all that carefully. I did notice that a number of the arguments required quite a bit of agility on the author's part. I'll just point that out. As a philosopher who's trained to read very closely, I did see some interesting moves and arguments there. So trained as a philosopher, trained in having ideas that last millennia. I am not someone who thinks about Johnny-come-lately ideas. That's just not in my DNA. I look for weight and substance in everything I want to talk about, right? And so there's a way to marry that notion of agility if you know who you are and where you're coming from, if you understand your educational mission, if you're pushing from, Descartes talked about this place where this immovable place, the place that you know is utterly stable. If you push from that place, which is the roots going all the way down, understanding your mission, you can do amazing agile work. And so I'm not ready to abandon the notion of agility, even though I kind of like that article. I say, yeah, maybe we're overusing it, but I just think that there's a way in which the training that we receive as academics, if it does not matter in the world in really interesting, relevant ways, then why did I do it?
Exactly. And of course, that fixed place does not mean faculty resistance to change.
Right. That's not what I mean. Right.
Okay, so agility is the first one. What's your second one?
I would say, I told you I'm a recovering philosopher. I'm also a philosopher who really likes people, which is not, I think that might be an anomaly as well.
An oxymoron, I think.
So what I found is that communication, these are not groundbreaking, but constantly communicating and trying to be as transparent as possible all the time and finding ways to get in front of people and let them voice their views as you begin to nudge or move them in different kinds of directions. I just can't tell you the ways in which communication and laughter, stories and narratives and anecdotes prepare the soil for really interesting administrative moves. I would say that in front of faculty, it may sound like a bit of subterfuge, but this is how things work when people begin to own. And so it's not just making good arguments, it's allowing people to own the positions that we're adopting. I think communication is a key part of that. And then I would say the third one is related to that. I go into conversations with a sense of where I want to end up. And Drum, this came from 20 years of teaching. The first 5 years I had my notes and I followed them and I made sure that at the end of the day I had touched all the damn themes that I wanted to touch on that day. If I hadn't, the next time I'd go back and recover them. And about year 10, I started realizing, you know what, here's the 3 things I think I want to get out today. I'd look at my notes before class and I'd purposely leave my notes on my desk in my office and walk into class, knowing the 3 things I wanted to express. It was through conversations those things came out. And the ways in which I want to provost is something similar. I go into a meeting, I kind of know the direction I want to head, but I want the people in the meeting to hoist their flags. I want to see where they are so that I can triangulate and see how best to bring them along to where I think we should go. And so what happens is sometimes in order to get people to hoist their flags, I have to hoist my own. And so I will say, I think we should go in this direction. And then I would get, no, we can't do that. So this is the reason. Then we're in discussion. And then 20 minutes later, I find myself saying the exact opposite of what I said 20 minutes prior. If you can do that well, it does not look as if you're wishy-washy. It looks as if you're taking in arguments and you're coming up with a decision that's best. So that's the way I've been trying to proceed. It requires patience and openness and not being tight with your time and your personality and your thoughts.
Yeah, well, that's part of being a leader. One of the premises when we do planning or especially change management with our firm is the mantra, people support what they help create.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
People want input into decisions that are going to affect them before the decision's made.
Right.
And so if you can go along with that, which it sounds like that's what you're doing with your third point, then you're going to end up having a much better decision come out of it, and it will help mitigate resistance to change.
I think what I've found this year too is it also provides speed.
Yes.
I mean, oddly enough, things go faster when you take the time.
It's the Japanese model of planning. If you take a look at the overall project, and this comes out of Project Management Institute, the Japanese spend far more time on planning and far less time on implementation, whereas the American U.S. model is less time in planning, but the implementation takes longer because people haven't thought through all of the things. And ultimately, the Japanese model is more efficient, or it certainly can be.
Right.
Just wrapping up, what's next for you, Eric? What's next for Beloit?
Well, so what's interesting, Drum, is that we saw this summer, we started to build out summer courses. So we have both block courses that are 3 to 7 weeks long, and Beloit has this really wonderful modern languages department. So we've had CLS language study on campus over the summers over the past few years. Of course, we had to pivot all those online this summer. And what we saw was an explosion of demand for those courses.
Wow.
And so we're taking the summers to build out fully online course offerings, and we will not stop next summer in thinking about building out more and more courses online over the summer. We recently rejoined CIC and Acadium, which is this consortium of online courses. And we're going to both be a host institution and a teaching institution, or a home institution and a teaching institution for Acadium. That led to this summer building out a sequence of bridge courses for our entering students. So we have 6 sections, and nearly half of the entering class, within 10 days, signed up for half-credit summer bridge courses.
Nice.
And so those are kind of interesting ways in which we're really thinking about this holistic idea of a small liberal arts that begins to talk to students, maybe in February. We have a new advising mentoring program where the deposited student is paired with a faculty advisor that they'll have for the first 2 years within 72 hours after the deposit. So this kind of arc of involving them in the community starts early on, continues over the 4 years, and then leads into the alumni and the ways in which we've begun to harness alumni expertise and energy in the education of our students. That's what I'm really looking to build out, because Beloit, they got good bones. They do the teaching well. Small liberal arts, you can trust the faculty. They're doing great work. Now let's go ahead and build out the ends. And it allows for the value distinction of that education to begin to shine. It just begins to sparkle in ways that, frankly, we got to stop keeping this as the best kept secret and start crowing about this kind of education. I think small liberal arts is what is needed today. So small liberal arts is not in crisis. The world's in crisis. And because the world's in crisis, they can't see that what it needs is small liberal arts, right?
I love it. I think on that happy note, we're going to end this. So,
all right, Joe.
Eric, thank you so much. This has been fabulous. It's really appreciate your going through your decision process, how you've done this, and best of luck going forward with this. I think you've really hit on something that could work and will work through the COVID era, but even beyond that, I can see so many possibilities. So congratulations and thank you.
Well, thanks, Drew. I'm careful what you offer, right? So I'm going to be in touch about you emceeing this conference that is popping around in my head.
I certainly hope so. I look forward to working with you again.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Drew.
Take care. Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to this week's special guest, Dr. Eric Boynton, provost at Beloit College, who shared with us how they are going about their fall term and ensuring how students will get the full experience, whether they be online, face-to-face, or some sort of blended model. I also want to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Blackbaud. Visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn about their cloud fundraising, accounting, education management, scholarship, and analytics solutions that are powering some of higher ed's top institutions. Our next guest is Tom Netting, who we welcome back to talk with us about the most recent going-ons in Washington. Despite COVID and Black Lives Matter, there's a lot going on in D.C. that we need to keep up with, and Tom will be here to bring us up to date on all the latest news.
This episode of Changing Higher Ed was brought to you by Blackbaud, the world's leading cloud software company powering social good. Be sure to visit blackbaud.com/highered to learn how they can help your institution deliver a better experience from admissions to advancement. Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drum McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.